Welcome to Grappling with the Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I'd like to welcome my guest today. With me for the first time is Rashmi Airan. Did I get your last name right?
You did, yeah.
Oh, good. Who is a keynote speaker and consultant determined to create organizational cultures focused on integrity, authenticity, and accountability. Nick Gallo, also known as the Ethics Evangelist, is CEO of Compliance Line, as well as creator and host of the Ethics Experts podcast. And Laura Gray is a passionate people connector, columnist, author, and development director of the ALS Association Northern Ohio chapter. Thank you all for being with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And here is our scenario. You schedule a business lunch with a colleague or prospect. After 5 minutes of talking business, the conversation drifts into personal chatting and schmoozing. You have a nice time, but never get back to business. Since you intended this to be a business meeting and did discuss some business, is there anything wrong with submitting the cost of lunch as a business expense? Would it make a difference if you spent half the time on business, or 75%, or 99%? What about the ethics of doing business with companies that outsource to countries without child labor laws or guilty of human rights violations? What about buying products that aren't ethically sourced? If we demand 100% ethics from others, are we not effectively cutting ourselves off from doing business? How do we accommodate the need for realistic standards in choosing business partners without compromising our own ethical integrity? So let's start with the business lunch, and then we can move into more complicated issues. Who'd like to jump in first?
So I feel like I'll start. I feel like the business lunch scenario, it really depends on your job function, in my opinion. So if, and I'm going to give actually a perfect example because this happened to me yesterday. I was at a lunch with a woman who is director of business development for a bank. And so her job is to network, go out into the community, meet individuals, try to sell them, but really it's not like selling, right? It's more like creating relationships to hope to entice people to come to the bank, whether it's today, tomorrow, or at some point with a small loan, to get a small loan or to put their deposits down. So for me, and then she wanted to expense it. And so for me, she said, well, but this is business development. I'm creating a relationship with you. You have a business, right? So to me, I think that that's acceptable. But I think there are scenarios where it's not, because if you are literally meeting with a friend, it has nothing to do, with actually your job function, and you're just hiding it under the guise of a business expense. I think that's different. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think you used a word in that preamble, you intended this to be a business meeting. This doesn't sound like it was not intended to be a business meeting. This ended up just sort of drifting into this other thing. So I think the intent is kind of the thing. If you're intending it to be a business meeting and me and you get together and we talk for a while and we end up not getting to the business stuff because we were building a relationship and all that kind of stuff, that to me seems like totally appropriate. When I was in private equity, there was a deal that we were working on with the CEO. We were trying to buy his company. And we ended up going and doing a round of golf with the guy. And we were at we were at the middle, whatever, the 10th hole or whatever, the 9th hole. And I was like, dude, we have not talked about the deal at all. And I was just kind of, I was like the younger guy, just kind of along for the ride. And it wasn't until like the 17th hole that we started like actually talking about the deal. And so, to me, it's like that deal would have never gotten done if we hadn't golfed all day together, not talking business, getting to know each other. And that's kind of an extreme example of like this relationship building and how critical it is to like getting deals done, getting business done,
Let's
Yeah,
start with the golf
I'm
example.
definitely.
Excuse me a second. I'll get right to you. That golf example I've heard used over the years, looking in from the outside, it looks like people are just using business as an excuse to play golf, whereas on the inside, it really is part of the business process.
Yeah, because I hate golf,
That's funny.
Go ahead,
Well,
Laura.
actually, to that point, I've spent most of my career in some form of biz dev, business development, whether it's nonprofit or private sector, but I don't golf at all. So I always felt like I was missing out on the art of the deal, so to speak, because
Yeah.
I'm not a golfer. Um, and then the scenario for me, the way you read it, where you said a colleague or a prospect. Well, if I'm going with a colleague, I'm never going to expense that lunch because we could have probably had a meeting at work and discussed it if it's a true colleague. A prospect, of course. And in my case with the prospect, I typically won't bring up, quote, what my intent is second, third time, maybe,
Exactly.
I really want to get to know them and have them get to know me because I still believe in people do business with who they like and trust.
True.
That's how the world works.
Right.
I'm actually teaching I'm sure you do this with your kids. This is what I'm teaching my kids. Like, you have to have the intelligence, but you have to create relationships authentically, selflessly.
Yes.
Not because you want something from somebody, just because relationships 20 years from now show up in your life. And this happened to me in my life, and I know it firsthand.
Same here.
Absolutely. I think with that too, I would say like to create the relationships authentically, I have a program where I work with youth as teach them how to be authentic, discover that within themselves. And then, it flows out of that and other people see that. And I think recognize and appreciate the genuineness of it.
Mhm.
I just saw today that I think authentic is Merriam-Webster's word of the year.
Oh, there you go, Rashmi, for bringing that one up.
Well, we
You're in the
need more
bonus.
CEOs. And the thing is you can throw the word around, but the work I do, the work I'm seeing, right, and the work that I'm doing with CEOs and leadership teams is that it's easy to say, but to be truly authentic, right, you have to live in a place of vulnerability and having the courage to do that. And that's not easy. That takes work and commitment. And it's an everyday commitment, right? It's every single moment. It's not easy. And life takes over, right? It's easy to just like turn that side off of your brain because you're trying to make whatever payroll or whatever, the stock market price. So that part of authenticity, I think, we still need to be working on as in a global way.
I agree 100% with that. And I would say there's an ethical component to absolutely an ethical component to authenticity, because when you're not being authentic, you're being something else. You're being something artificial. And so it's some kind of carapace, it's some kind of armor, it's some kind of facade that we have, learned to put on in a corporate setting that is clearly not our authentic selves. And the image that we're putting off is obviously something that is at least attempting to be, better than what is reality. And that is a lie. You know what I'm saying? Like the fact of it is, in like today's economy, which is a knowledge work economy where people are the assets, where our creativity is what drives, the value creation, that human connection is more important than it's ever been. And the old ways of doing things in the sort of industrial, the industrial economy, which was so influenced by those sort of militant structures that came out of the war and stuff like that, it doesn't work today because of that shift in the way that work is done, or the shift in the assets that generate the work. Obviously, the assets now are human beings. And so the more we bring those old kind of approaches and those old frameworks to bear in today's economy, the more inauthentic we end up coming across, the less room there is for actual connection, the less belonging people feel in our workplaces, and the less ethical of a workplace or a work environment we end up creating.
Yeah, this isn't quite where I envisioned the conversation going, but I'd like to follow this.
That's what you get with this group, you know what
Well,
I mean?
yeah,
Go with the flow.
I think we're all being our authentic selves. But there's a cynical joke that once you can fake authenticity, you've got it made. But
That's true. That's always true.
Sometimes are there times when it's best not to be authentic? I mean, if I use a lot of profanity and I'm in an environment where that's not appropriate, should I be my authentic self in that way? Is it inauthentic to clean up my speech because that's what's appropriate for the moment? And then
I don't
if
see that. Sorry,
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I don't see that as being authentic or not. I think
Agreed.
that is recognizing the situation that you're in. I think authenticity refers to being true to yourself, not in terms of what language we use, what clothes we wear. I think that's different because what I wear out, to a speaking engagement might be very different than what I wear to the gym. So I think that that's different. I think authenticity means you're allowing, you have intentional awareness of what your purpose is, who you are, how you're making decisions, are you holding yourself accountable? Like all of those things, I think when we're talking about organizational authenticity and individual authenticity, it's about these particular things where vulnerability and courage, and that's where it plays in. I mean, I tell people I have a foul mouth, man. I was in prison, so you have to excuse me, but I don't do that when I'm, I mean, my kids are older now, so it's not as much of a deal, but like, there's certain situations, clearly I'm not going to be using certain words. And I would say I'm about as authentic as they come. I try to be in that space all the time. So I don't think I'm not being inauthentic by not cussing here.
I think the ethical aspect of the authenticity thing comes down to, again, this is like a stereotype, but like the stereotypical boss who's never wrong, who never makes a mistake, all those kinds of things. I don't think like somebody giving off that kind of a facade to me is like definitely inauthentic, and I think it creates that low integrity workplace. The fact of it is, every person is full of flaws. Every person has anxieties and fears, and everybody screws things up. And allowing that to be into the conversation, or allowing yourself to drop your facade a little bit and showing that is the kind of authenticity I'm talking about. I'm not talking about social mores or what's appropriate in this space versus that space, or this audience versus that audience. I think you can still be your authentic self, without sort of stepping over those appropriate lines or whatever, or those appropriability lines, if that's even a word. I don't know.
Mm.
It's not a word.
What about people are, especially teenagers, as I taught high school for a long time, they're very sensitive about being hypocritical. And if you are, there's an idea that if I don't feel like I should, if I don't genuinely feel like I want to do something, then doing it is hypocritical. Whereas I would say it could be aspirational. I want to set the bar higher for myself. I want to expect more for myself, and it may not come naturally right now. Is that authentic? Is that inauthentic? Is it somewhere in between?
Well, I think maybe somewhere. I mean, we are grappling with the gray. Maybe that's part of the gray. A lot of it comes down to self-awareness based on, my fellow panelists' remarks and comments that, especially with youth, I mean, letting them know where growth is not comfortable, so there are those challenges where the more you grow and expand, you grow into that authenticity, which I think is part of us when we are born into the world.
Yep. I agree.
What about some of these other topics that we started edging into? We want to do business with ethical companies. We want to be aware of how our actions are impacting the wider world. But I was recently looking at an article that was talking about the environmental fallout from green energy, that solar panels apparently are devastating to the environments where they're set up, and they can't be recycled, and windmills, same type of thing. And
Feels ironic.
the lithium
yeah.
for the batteries in the cars, or it's child labor, and it's strip mining. And then there's another element that the batteries make the cars heavier so that people are more likely to get hurt in accidents. There's all this unintended consequence of a very sincere effort to make the planet a better place. You could come to the idea of maybe we should just leave things as they are, because when we try to fix them, we make them worse.
well, maybe we try to make them worse, and then we'll inadvertently make it all better, you know?
Oh, that's a strategy. But how in other words, realistically, can we really cut ourselves off from every business that's not living up to the standards that in a perfect world it would be?
I don't think you cut yourself off, right? But I think that there's, okay, for me, I think this is definitely a personal thing, right? I try to do my research as much as possible with the time that I have to understand, which companies are committing human rights violations and, violating child labor laws or have specific factories in specific places. So I try to know of those companies, and to the best of my ability, avoid those companies. I'm not like putting out boycott or, cancel this, a cancel culture type of thing. I do think it's a personal choice. But I have a niece who's very, very committed to the environment. She, composts, she does all these things in Philadelphia. No matter how cold it is, she's taking her compost out, and she's, I don't know, 14. And so I think we have a responsibility to our younger generation, to all of us have kids, right? So I think our younger generation, they are growing up in a world with a lot of strife, a lot of conflict, as we all know. And there are certain things that they believe, and things have been proven that they can do to make the earth safer, to make it last longer, to have better water, whatever, to protect human rights. And so I think we have a responsibility as parents, I believe, to role model to the best of our abilities. And if that means that we're not buying from certain companies, and that's what that means. But that's my opinion.
Kind of goes back to your point, Nick, or in the business lunch case about the intention. And I think it's worth following that up a little bit in any case, because there's a famous road that's paved with good intentions.
Right.
On the other hand, as Rashmi's saying, we part of who we are is the sincere intent we put into the choices we make. So sometimes the outcome is going to matter more or less. It seems like it's very gray. Maybe too gray.
I mean, at this point, it's such a complex issue. Supply chains are not local anymore. I mean, they're everywhere. I mean, if you look at the average product, it's coming from thousands of different, at least hundreds of different, suppliers coming together. And all those suppliers have a whole ring of suppliers that have suppliers and so forth. So I don't think you can realistically have any kind of like level of confidence that you're avoiding that 100%. I think to Rashmi's point, you can have an intentionality, and you can, do some research or something if that's important, to you. But until you're doing like third party, risk management on behalf of those organizations, and you can see that full supply chain, you're just never going to know for sure. And the odds of these things happening, human right violations, whatever that means, those things happening in different countries and jurisdictions and governments and so forth are obviously a lot higher than they are here. And it's not zero here either. You know what I mean? So the odds of it happening out there are obviously much higher than zero. I don't know. Until you have true visibility into that, you can't really do anything,
Yeah, and I would agree too with what they're saying. And to the best of my ability, whatever that means, to the best of my capability, being aware, but also, Giannis, and what you were saying, oh, this is great. No, it's bad. This is bad. This is great. And it's like, I don't know what's true anymore.
Yeah, right.
I would like to think I would like to think I'm an eternal optimist, but I also am starting to rely more on my gut and my own research, whatever that means, because where are you going to research to really find the truth? People can put whatever they want. You can sway and swing any data to sell. So it's, to the best of my ability, I try to avoid, what I believe are unethical companies and situations.
And as
I mean,
you
but
say,
for the
like, when
market
you've
to
got-
be the self-correcting mechanism that it is in theory, there have to be reactions by market participants, demanders, right, like us, in relation to or in response to information that we find out about the people that we're, buying, the suppliers. And as people vote with their feet, then typically what we see is we see suppliers make these adjustments. Like Disney came out recently with their quarterly, statement or their annual statement. I can't remember what it was. And they were just talking a lot through how the stance that they've taken with their content and so forth has, generated a response from the market that was a little bit unintended. And they're kind of, based on, if you read it, you can see that they're kind of rethinking some of those things and so forth. So, I mean, at some level, that's the market working, right? That's people finding out about child labor over here and saying, I'm not going to buy these shoes anymore. And then those guys, that organization making the correction. To Laura's point, it's a question ultimately then about like if information is getting out, because like we're not going to I'm not going to uncover whether the soles of the new Nikes I'm about to buy were sourced in Cambodia by child labor. I'm just not going to. I would never find that out. But if it comes out and I start to change my behavior, then that can start to drive some change, and the market, quote unquote, at large, the market of suppliers can start to take steps that we're starting to see as the foundation for the ESG movement, for example, right? Like that whole ESG movement is a response to a demand from the marketplace of people that they're trying to sell to for more socially conscious organizations or more kind of a stakeholder approach. And organizations are taking steps. Some of those are sort of marketing-based steps that don't really have a lot of substance behind them. Some of them, like a company like Patagonia, it's the exact opposite, right? Like they're meaningful steps. Either way, there's at least, this conversation is happening to some level,
Yeah.
I mean, even in when it gets into politics, in one of the debates, I think two of the candidates were going after each other, accusing each other of doing business with China in their particular states. And there again, is it realistic not to do business with China? I suppose if the United States wanted to make a national decision, that would change things a little bit. But we're back to the idealism versus realism conflict. And we want to hold ourselves and others to the highest possible standards. We also have to live in a world where not everybody's observing those standards.
Well, if I could add or chime in there momentarily,
Please.
I'm going to hold myself and hopefully my children to high standards, but I believe I can't hold anyone else on this call to a high standard. I can choose to do business with them or have a relationship with them, but I've heard the expression, as we all have, to hold others high. I have mine. I'm true to myself, and I'm going to align with others who have that similar standards or energy.
right?
It's funny because I grew up in a community and culture with very high standards. I'm sure many of us have, right? I'm a first generation American immigrant family. I certainly have very high self expectations as well, which certainly was part of my demise at the beginning. And so I have learned to this word of high expectations and high achievements, however we want to put it. I'm very careful about the terms that I use because I think, first of all, it's different for everybody, but it's not about expectations per se. I think it's more about living in a space of, I'm back to the word authenticity, but I really believe it's about our intention to be true to our core values, whatever those may be. And if we know what our core values are, and we're always focused that every action, behavior, decision is in alignment with those core values, then everything that we do is I don't know how to say it, is in alignment with them, right? Like whether it's our purchasing power, whether it's how we parent our children, whether it's how we talk to our friends, whether it's who we date, I think it should pan out in every aspect of our lives, how we lead our teams, it should pan out. Which is why I think it's really important for us to have awareness about these things, because I think there's a lot of people that aren't aware, and they might know on paper what their core values are, but if they're not actually living those values and they're actionable, then it's different, right? You can write anything down, and that's true for organizational core values as well. So that's my take.
Well, there's an effort with core values, as you know. I mean, there's an effort that we take to become self-aware, to identify the core values, and then to proceed to proactively live that way. So yeah, I agree with you. There are people that they don't, they may not want to do the work. So I don't know.
And you mentioned the idea of writing down. It's easy to write down core values. I wonder how many people have actually done that. And I think it's probably a useful exercise. I know I was involved in a online community, and we wanted to make a list of our core values, and we spent several weeks refining it, trimming it, editing it, revising it. It was a intense bit of labor there.
I mean, I'm surprised with the number of people that I work with, like top CEOs and leaders of top global organizations. We get into workshop mode, and have you ever drilled down to your 2 core values? And many have not. The other thing is, right, of course, our values change. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
No, please.
I was just saying that, like, my core values today at 52, having lived through some very hard things, are very different than they were at 42. I just think we also have to recognize that our core values change because our core values come from our life experiences, where we learn and we grow and we adapt and hopefully do better.
I mean, it's an interesting question, because I just always view values as like aspirational, because regardless of whether I can articulate my values or not, I don't always perform to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at some level, there are things I like. Use our organization as an example. We did a bunch of work to come up with what are our core values as a company, and why do we exist, and what impact are we trying to make on the world, right? Those are words on a wall, and I can guarantee you that those are not being lived out by every person in every moment of the day of our organization. So if these values are a picture of these values then can only be a picture of what we aspire to be. And our job then becomes trying to close that gap between the actual culture and the culture that's described, or inferred by those words on the wall. Because the actual culture is not the words on the wall, of course. It's the sum total of all these behaviors and beliefs of all the human beings that work at this organization. So I think I've always just kind of viewed the values more as something that like we're striving toward, not something that is at the core of me, from which everything, and I know you're not saying this, but from which everything sort of like stems from perfectly. It just, to me, that doesn't happen. But I think it's such a useful exercise to like, well, what are those things that resonate most deeply with me? And those then can turn into a lighthouse, or like a guiding light, or like a compass or something for us in those moments. But I can tell you that like, I definitely have core values that I don't live out all the time. You know what I'm saying?
That makes
I
you
think
authentic.
I think that's interesting, Nick, because I think organizational core values are at a much broader level, right? Whether you're an organization of 2 or 5,000, right? Coming up with your organizational core values takes effort as to what is the organization's mission and what are those core values. But as a person, as an individual, as you, Nick, the way I, for myself, have defined, and the work I do define, how I define core values is when I really think about the actions and decisions and behaviors that I make every single moment of every single day, what do those hinge on? What is
those things?
What is the basis? And so I'll tell you what my 2 core values, and this has come through a lot of work of my own digging deep, deconstructing all the crap in my life, is courage and family. Those are my 2. And so, and it shows up in various ways. Like people will say, well, but you live in a space of vulnerability. Why isn't vulnerability one of your core values? I'm like, well, you know what? It takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable.
Yeah, right.
Lots of times these core values are linked. there's one that's underpinning the other. So but I know that shows up for me in everything, right? Whether it's my consulting work or being a volleyball mom, like it shows up everywhere, whether I realize it or not. So
interesting.
I think it is awareness. Like, I think, we were all talking about awareness. So that is relevant. And I think all of this starts with the understanding that if we can all be aware of where we want to be and how we can all, perform better, be better citizens. Anyway, I feel like I'm taking space. I want others to talk.
No, that's very courageous of you to give us the floor.
In fact, the sages I was teaching, they say that it's not incumbent upon you to finish the job, but neither are you free to withdraw from it. So what is the job?
Yeah.
The job is to fulfill your own personal potential in the best possible way. That's the job. So realistically speaking, none of us are going to do that. Because if I take my eye off the ball for one moment, all right, I just blew that bit of potential.
Right.
So essentially what the sages are saying is you're allowed to give yourself grace to fall short. But that's not an excuse to stop trying. And the whole Jewish concept of repentance is not wallowing in self-deprecation, but rather taking responsibility, making amends, and devising a plan to do better moving forward. And if we implement in that line, I think that's a pretty good definition of authenticity.
Yeah. So I keep thinking about what Rashmi said. It takes a lot of digging to get down to those two, because to your point, like, it's probably at a subconscious level of what's actually guiding those things. And there's something that's guiding those behaviors. You know, what do you think about when you get down to those two and you say, I don't like those two, I don't want them to be those two?
Well, so the exercise I usually do is we start with 10 or 6, however many you want to start with, right? And so I kind of write a whole list down. I make people yell them out, and I'm writing them down in my terrible handwriting. And ultimately, it's not immediately what are your two. It's a drill down process, and it's hard because if you start with 6, let's say, to go from 6 to 4 is hard.
Totally.
Like, wait, but I don't want to get rid of hard work or loyalty or whatever, commitment, compassion, empathy, all the other, there's so many, right? Because then you feel like by Xing it out or crossing it out, however we're doing it, I'm somehow not loyal.
You're anymore. Losing that part of
right. And that's not what it is, right? The core, it's not that you're not, and I'm speaking of double negatives here, but it's not that those core values that I've now removed aren't who I am, aren't part of my fabric. It just means that at the core of everything is maybe that one particular, 2 particular. So I go from whatever it is, and I get down to 2, because you just have to keep thinking and thinking. Okay, totally. It's a little not fair because I've done this so many times with so many groups that I have redone this for myself so many times. So I'm pretty clear what mine are. But it's hard when I do this with groups because it's the same reaction. Like, how do I get down to 2?
Right. We started with 10 for our organization, and then we ended up boiling those down to 3. And it's not like those 10 don't exist anymore.
Yeah,
they're just kind of part of these other 3, those add some dimension to the 3 or something.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
When we did it, we just brainstormed. I think we came up with about 30. Yeah. And then we just started grouping them. Mm-hmm. And we tried to get them down into smaller and smaller groups, and then decide which one in the group is most representative of the entire group.
Yeah.
And then we labeled that as a core value, and then had a short description that integrated the other ones into it.
Yeah, it's almost like the right number of values is like the least amount possible, but no fewer or something.
I had a really interesting thing happen 2 weeks ago. I was working with the leadership team and the like top leader of this organization, where we're doing this whole exercise. And I said, okay, let's throw out some values. And he said, but wait, are we talking about like our values at work or our values at home? And so it was great because I get this question all the time. And I go, well, let's talk about it. Do your values change? Like, you as a human, do your values change when you walk into your work? No. Right? He said, well, what about love? Like, love, I don't really feel like love is an appropriate core value when I go to work. I said, well, it just depends, right? Your love that you might have for your spouse or your child, that's a different type of love. But you can have your love for your work, your love, your compassion for, the industry that you're in, for your community, for your teams. It still plays out if that's one of your core values. And I think that that's always an interesting conversation, because we are one human, right? We just happen to drive from one place to the next or not. I work from home, but
yeah, that is such a crazy thing because it's almost like devoid from the like professional lexicon, the word love. Like nobody even wants to say it or something at work because it's like not appropriate or whatever. But like we're all human beings and we're all like so wired for it. It's what.
And by the way, that's what we crave most in life.
100%. 100%.
Right? So,
Well, if I may say,
sorry.
that is my core value. There's love and there's fear for me. And I just focus everything, whether it's work. And fortunately, I'm in a line of work that, people with ALS, and we're serving them daily, and looking for cures. So I love what I do. And I feel sometimes awkward saying it because it can be very difficult and challenging for many emotional reasons. But so I just base love. I mean, I guess to your point, you broke it down to two. That's hard, like you said. And that doesn't mean I'm not all those other things either. I just really, and it's only been in the last few years, it's about love. Love.
Well, I really like that, and I think that's a nice place we can wrap things up for now, because really we are, as you say, we are one person wherever we go, and trying to compartmentalize core values into different environments. This came up in the discussion a little earlier. It doesn't sound like it's terribly healthy. Whereas if we can take a value like love, as you're describing, Laura, and demonstrate how it applies in every aspect of our lives, then we're going to be living much more consistently.
Well, that's it. Maybe that's what the
authentically.
authenticity is all about. It's all about consistency.
Yeah. So
I got something though for you. I know we're trying to wrap up, so I'll save it
you know
for
what?
you.
Why don't you hold that
The
thought
after
for me,
show.
and we will carry it over into the after talk.
Cool.
And just thank you very much, Rashmi Airan. Thank you for
thank you for
letting me
having
finally get you on the program.
me.
Laura Gray, Nick Gallo, as always, appreciate your thoughts, your insights. For those of you who are watching or listening, if you have a topic you'd like us to take up, please go to my website, ethicsninja.com, use the contact information, and if it's compelling, we will certainly bring it up on a future episode. And until then, as always, I encourage you to continue grappling with